Welcome to the Healthy Aging webinar with Professor Susan Kurrle. My name is Ellen Miller from Willoughby City Council. Today's webinar is supported by local councils in the Northern Sydney region, and I would like to welcome them online today. I would also like to welcome the people who've linked in from South Australia, Western Australia, Queensland, and Tasmania. We've certainly got a good reach today. The format for today will consist of a 40-minute talk by Professor Susan Kurrle, followed by a 15-minute question and answer. Questions submitted online have been forwarded to Professor Kurrle. If you have any other questions, we're happy for you to put those in via chat. The webinar will be recorded and can be accessed later within a 2-week period on the Willoughby City Council's Older Adults webpage. With that in mind, please do not unmute yourself today, as this will reduce the quality of the recording and also make it difficult for other people to hear. I would now like to introduce Professor Kurrle. Susan Kurrle is a geriatrician practicing at Hornsby Ku-ring-gai Hospital in Northern Sydney and at Batemans Bay Hospital in Southern New South Wales. She is the Clinical Network Director for Rehabilitation and Aged Care in Northern Sydney Local Health District, and she holds the current chair in healthcare of older people in the Facility of Medicine and Health at the University of Sydney. Her research and practice interests centre on dementia, frailty, successful ageing, and intergenerational care. You may also know her from the award-winning series, Old People's Home for 4-year-olds, which explores the positive impact on the health and happiness of 4-year-olds and 84-year-olds who work and play together. Season 2 is currently streaming on ABC and a must-watch for everyone. So good morning to you all and welcome to Professor Kurrle.
Thanks very much, Ellen. And thanks to the people who've commented on our show on the Old People's Home for 4-year-olds. It's great. And thank you, Ellen, for the publicity. So my job today is to talk about successful aging. I'm just about to share my screen. So hopefully you will get yep, that's looking hopeful. You'll get a big orange screen in front of you in a minute. If I can get yeah, okay.
Yes, that's up and shared. Thank you.
Up and shared, excellent. So, yeah, thanks again and welcome to those people from outside Northern Sydney. It's really nice to have you all involved. So, yeah, aging successfully, and I've always loved this particular picture, which is, I think, in a museum in Berlin, but it was painted back in, I think, 1546, so quite a long time ago. Lots and lots of people have been looking for this fountain of youth, but I do love this one because if you look at it, it seems to be mainly women. In fact, it's all women getting into the fountain of youth, which kind of says something about, I suppose, the expectations of the artist, who was obviously male. But yeah, it's how do we do well when we don't have this, this fountain of youth? And I guess the subtitle or the subtitle to my talk is, how did this lady live to be 122? So this lady is Madame Eugénie Calment. As you can see, she is actually dead now, but she is the longest living human that we are aware of, because we have her birth date and her death date. And she lived in Arles in southern France for almost all of her life. We do know a lot about her because an Australian psychologist called Karen Ritchie went to France, fell in love with a Frenchman, got married and has stayed there. And she actually met and studied Madame Calment during the last years of her life. And I'll talk a little bit more about her in a minute. So I just want to throw up some examples of successful aging to get you thinking. And obviously, Madame Calment is up there in the top left-hand corner. But there's lots of other people doing things, as you can see in these pictures. Whether it's cycling, whether it's still working on a property with sheep. The gentleman in the bottom left-hand corner holds a world pole vault record, and it's actually quite high. Tai Chi. And the lady on the bottom right-hand corner is Heather Lee from Richmond in New South Wales, who in her early 90s holds a number of world records and is a really good example of what you can do into your 90s. So what do all these people have in common, apart from being older, which they are, because they're all over 85? They've all exceeded their life expectancy, and I'll mention life expectancy in a minute. They're all outside, being active. That's the really important thing. And they're engaged in activities outside what is considered normal for their age. And I often remember someone saying to me when I said, why don't you jog around the oval? And she said to me, what will people think? I'm far too old. And I said, never too old. And that will be my refrain over and over again. And if any of you saw Old People's Home for 4-year-olds last night, I think it's that episode I say, if I had to give older people or people of 70 one piece of advice, it would be to exercise, because it is the most important thing to keep our bodies and also our brains active. And the people in that picture, they haven't let age get in the way of doing what they want to do, or they've modified what they want to do. Certainly the gentleman on the bike, whose name escapes me at the moment, he's from South Australia. He can't walk because of his arthritis. He can just literally walk short distances, but he's out there cycling because his body allows him to do that. Okay, so life expectancy in Australia. I've shown the graph here. It only goes to 2015. It is still sneaking up very, very gradually. And this graph you can see on the screen is in great contrast to, say, the United States of America, where their curve flattened quite a few years ago and is now going down. So their life expectancy is predicted to be lower than Mexico's in about, I think, 8 years' time, which will be a very interesting situation that they will end up probably having to import people. However, for Australia and, say, Japan and a number of other countries, our life expectancy is still sneaking up. At the moment, your average life expectancy at birth is 81 for men and 85 for women. But we all know lots of people who are older than that. And this is very much an average. So how do we stay fit and well into our 80s and 90s? I haven't said into our hundreds, because there's not that many people who actually want to live to be 100. It's quite interesting when I often do a bit of a poll when I'm talking in a group, and obviously this is in a face-to-face group, and I ask people at what age they'd be happy to die. And it's usually in the 90s. Very few people are courageous enough to say they want to live to 100. But I think the really important thing is to do basically exactly what Prince Philip did and live. He lived well until he died, really until the last 3 months when he had his hospital admissions. And it was pretty clear then that he was probably in the last couple of months of his life. But he is a really great example of how you live well until you die. And how do we avoid the unpleasant conditions of older age, such as dementia and frailty? And I will talk about those just a little more specifically later. So coming back to Madame Jeannie Calment, this is sort of her potted history on the right. She took up fencing, as in the sporting type of fencing, at age 85. She rode a bicycle until she was 100, and she stopped riding her bicycle because the gendarme in Arles took it away from her because she was running into people. She had macular degeneration, and so her vision wasn't exactly fantastic. She lived alone till she was 110, and importantly, she lived on in a third floor apartment. So she had to go up 3 flights of stairs to get up to her apartment. No lift in that apartment. She drank a large glass of port wine, fortified wine, every day. She had 2 cigarettes a day, and that's really interesting because she had to walk up and down those 3 flights of stairs because she didn't like smoking in her apartment. She didn't like the smell. And she ate 1 kilogram of dark chocolate every week. And people often ask how dark. I think from what I understand from Karen Ritchie's work, the lady who studied Madame Calmont, it was, the 70% plus type of dark chocolate. So it's very interesting. That was her prescription for long life. She gave up smoking at 120, and quite a few people have said to me, well, obviously giving up smoking killed her. But she stopped smoking because she was by that stage in a care facility, and she'd have to go outside, and she didn't like going outside. She poured olive oil on her food and rubbed it on her skin. And the reason for me putting that in is because I do talk about the Mediterranean diet in a little while. And while I don't advocate necessarily putting the olive oil on your skin, certainly olive oil, using it in your food preparation is a really good thing. It's interesting for Madame Calmont because she outlived her husband, not unusual these days, but she also outlived her son and her grandchildren, but not her great-grandchildren. The very interesting thing, and the thing I love about her, is that she also outlived her solicitor. And that's important because the solicitor, aged 45, bought her apartment from her when she was 75. And in France, you can buy a house, but then you can sell your house or your apartment, but stay in it until you die. And of course, she didn't die for a very long time, and she didn't move for a very long time. And her solicitor was dead well before Madame Calmont. She died at 122 and a half, actually. She was frail, and you can see that. And you can see the photo down the bottom left-hand side at her 122nd birthday. She was frail, and we'll talk about what frailty is. She did have poor vision and poor hearing, things that unfortunately do go along with getting older. But she was independent until her final days, and she didn't have dementia. And I think that's important, because sometimes people think, dementia is inevitable if you live long enough. Well, Madame Calmont is an example of the fact that it isn't inevitable. So she's kind of one of my pin-up girls, who met a couple more later. But she was very active, very involved. And probably the other thing to say about her, which isn't on this slide, is that she was a very positive person. She talked about, the glass being, or the cup as it is in French, being half full. She always saw it as half full, not half empty. And I think that positive view of life is absolutely essential to staying well as you age. So looking at what does the evidence say about growing old successfully, and everything I say today doesn't come out of my head. It's based on on scientific articles or and that sort of thing, not just what we think might happen. There were 7 particular factors, I guess, from the centenarian studies that have been done. And these are studies of people in Okinawa, which Okinawa are the islands at the tail end of Japan, the southern end of Japan. They have the oldest living people in the world still there, and they're all active. But they also looked at Sardinia, New England in northeast US, and in Australia, our centenarians. And it was pretty consistent what everybody found. The first thing was have the right genes, because we know that health and longevity are hereditary. But that's not all. If your mother lived to a late age, you are likely to, unless you are unlucky enough to, say, get cancer and miss it, or be involved in a car accident, or some other incident that shortens your life. But if your parents live to a good age, on the whole, it is more likely you will too. So the genes are important. The second thing, and I've already mentioned it with Madame Calmont, is to have the right personality and be a glass half full person. And I think the evidence is so strong for this. When you look at the people who live into their 90s and 100s, even those people who actually are quite physically disabled or have had a stroke, if you have that positive nature, I think a sense of humour is incredibly important. and be optimistic and adaptable. That's what the studies very definitely show. And I've had people say to me, well, I can't change my personality, you know, if I'm a bit negative. Well, in actual fact, you can to a degree, and a leopard can change its spots, or at least fade them or change the color of them. And I think that's something really, really important to know, that you can teach yourself to be a little more positive. And, you know, there's all those books like Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. There are a lot of, if you like, self-help books that tell you how to do it. And you can, but being positive is just so important. And that sense of humor, I just love the sense of humor that people have. Sometimes it's almost a gallows sense of humor, but it's really important to have as you get older. These next 5 points, I'm going to talk about each one on it separately: being physically active, mentally active, eating and drinking while maintaining independence and avoiding disease. So the really important area, as I've said already, is being physically active. We are not physically active as a community anymore. I think back to when I was quite little, and Mum would do the washing on every day except Sunday. And we had one of those tubs that rotated, and everybody thought they were the ants' pants, but you still had to pull the washing out, put it through the wringer, put it back in when you'd emptied the tub for rinsing, take it out and put it through the wringer again. Now, if you're doing that with the old cotton double sheets that are wet, they weigh a lot. And so women were doing a gym session on most days. And that's not even including walking to the shops, walking their kids to school, and doing all the other housework and things like that. So I think as a community, we were much more active once. But we know now that the prescription, and it actually is scientifically worked out, you need 30 minutes 5 times a week of brisk exercise. That can be walking, jogging, cycling, swimming, dancing, going up and down stairs, whatever makes you puff. And it's important to be a little bit puffed. You're not training for a marathon, but you do want to be a little bit breathless, because that's flushing out your brain with oxygenated blood. And that is so good for preventing or putting off getting dementia, or even once you've got dementia, it slows its progress. It's good for depression. It actually enhances how you feel. As well as obviously being good for your muscles and bones and bowel and heart and blood pressure and everything else. So that 30 minutes 5 times a week is so important. But people would prefer to pop a pill than go for a walk. And although I think that is changing, and COVID certainly made people a little more active, I don't think there's any doubt about that. But that's prescription, 30 minutes, 5 times a week. We also suggest some resistance training, or weight training, some people call it. That could be at a gym, but it doesn't have to be. And look, on the right, you'll see what I suggest to my patients. Go to Target or Kmart and get some hand weights, 2-3 kilogram hand weights. They're $6 or $8 each. And put them somewhere in your kitchen where you can see them, and every time you go and make a cup of tea, you do some exercises with them, whether it's, you know, up and down, whatever you do, but get the muscles, particularly your upper body muscles, working. The other really important thing that we should all be doing, and we should probably all be doing between 30 and 50 of them a day, is sit to stand. So you simply fold your arms and stand up from a normal height chair. So you fold your arms so you can't use them to push up, and you go up slowly and you sit down slowly and you touch your backside on the chair, and then you go up again. And if you don't have burning thighs, or at least you can feel you've been working at the end of 10 of them, you're doing very well. But it's such an important exercise to do, because if you can't sit to stand independently, you can't obviously get out of a chair easily, but you can't get in and out of a car, and you can't get on and off the toilet. And that loss of independence will often mean that someone ends up in residential care. And I've seen it in my own family. You have to do that exercise to maintain your independence muscles. So your thigh muscles, your quadriceps at the front, your hamstrings at the back, and your buttocks. Those three big muscle groups are your independence muscles. So if you take anything away from today's talk, get out there and do your sit to stand exercises. It is a great way of warming up on a cold morning, but it really does get the blood flowing, and it's so good for you. The other thing that's quite important is balance training. Why? Because we don't want to fall. Falls are often the final event for a lot of people, particularly if you fall and have a hip fracture. And so doing balance exercises is important. And if you think of children, they're constantly doing balance exercises when they're playing, whether they're jumping on the trampoline or running along the curb or whatever it is, riding their bikes. We don't play like that as we get older. And so doing balance exercises is really important, and you can retrain your balance. So I have a colleague who always stands on one leg when she cleans her teeth, when she stands at the sink, and when she does the ironing. And that's her way of forcing, just making sure she's always working on her balance, because like everything, you've got to keep at it. Tandem stance is simply putting one foot in front of the other, as we used to have to do when the police got you out of the car when they thought you were drink driving and they made you walk along the white line. Tandem stance is basically that, but standing with one foot directly in front of the other. That is a really good practice thing, but for goodness sake, do it next to the kitchen bench or next to a solid couch or a chair, because you don't want to fall over. But it is really important. We should constantly be challenging our balance, because that is the way we prevent falls and hopefully improve frailty, which I'll talk about in a minute. As I said before, exercise is also important in preventing and treating a whole stack of things: dementia, depression, all those sorts of things. If you could put exercise in a pill, it would be the most effective medication ever marketed. And I'll say that again and again. And it doesn't matter what your exercise is, as long as you're getting a bit puffed. Okay, being mentally and socially active. It's kind of like aging successfully is almost like a stool with 3 legs, and the physical activity is important, but mental and social activity are also really, really important. So your interpersonal relationships, because it challenges your brain and keeps you thinking. And I think that's one thing we've really missed with COVID, is that interaction with family and friends. So what can you do? And we really encourage people to do is develop your mental activities, develop, whether it's bridge or chess or whatever, develop your social networks. Certainly learning a new language is really important. And one of my patients, who's now in her mid-90s, has learned Spanish and apparently speaks it quite well, but is really frustrated because she's not going to be able to get somewhere where she can speak it with a native. And that's really sort of quite upset her. She said everywhere we can go, they speak English. Everywhere, I guess, being New Zealand. So playing a musical instrument is also really important. Relearning it, playing the piano, that sort of thing. We suggest certainly to the men, join a men's shed. So important for the men. I call it Stitch and Ditch, the women's sewing groups. It's a lot more than that. I've looked at some of the quilts that some of the people I've worked with have made at their Stitch and Ditch class. U3A, I think, is so important. And I would encourage you, I have no doubt quite a few U3A members are listening, but I think this sort of thing is just so important because it's your mental activity and it's so interesting, and it's your social interaction. And things like Probus or Rotary Lions or all those sorts of things. Becoming a volunteer is important. I was talking to one of the volunteers at Hornsby Hospital, and he was saying it was nice to be back and doing things because he found it so important to keep his brain going, and he actually looked forward to it. And I can tell you, we look forward to having him because it means things happen that perhaps don't happen otherwise. And going to concerts, theatres, galleries, constantly challenging your mind with new things is really important. Eating and drinking well. I did mention this before. The Mediterranean diet is, look, every month it seems there's another article in one of the medical journals about the positive side of it, where, you know, it reduces your risk of dementia, it reduces your blood pressure, drops your risk of most of the cancers. And so I think it's pretty much, you know, that's what we probably should be doing. And that means reducing your saturated fats and processed foods and fast foods. It does mean more legumes, you know, chickpeas, more fresh veggies. I think of it as avocados and olive oil because they're the good oils that you can have in your Mediterranean diet. One thing I do want to mention though, and I think this is something that a lot of older people are not aware of, we must have an adequate protein intake as we get older because we actually need more. So at 40 or 50, you need 0.8 of a gram of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. Once you're 75, you need 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram body weight per day. But I look at what a lot of my older patients eat, and it's tea and toast for breakfast. It's a sandwich for lunch, and it might be soup and something for tea. It's not a protein-rich diet. And the easiest way to improve your protein intake is to eat a couple of eggs every day. Eggs, once you've had 2 eggs, I think you get at least 25 grams of protein. Forget the cholesterol story, unless you really are one of those very, very few people who have bad cholesterol. You can eat the eggs. And if you're really worried, you chuck one yolk out, cook 2 eggs, but just eat one yolk. Getting protein is so important. A tin of salmon is really good. A number of my patients use the Gym Junkies protein. You buy it in tubs in Coles, and a scoop of that is pretty close to 20 grams of protein. So you can have that in iced coffee. You can have it, you can get it down in all sorts of ways. But I think getting adequate protein is an important message for today because it stops you becoming frail or reduces your chances. Low to moderate use of alcohol, and I probably should have said nil to low use, because if you're not a drinker, don't run out and think you should start drinking. That's not what I'm saying. But if you enjoy a glass of wine or a gin and tonic in the evenings, by all means do it. But it's important to stick to the guidelines, no more than 10 drinks a week. And that's a drink as in 30 mils of a spirit or 125 mils of wine. It's not the huge wine glasses that they seem to sell these days that you can just about take a bath in. I measured one the other day, it was 450 mils. There's no way you should drink, that's more than half a bottle of wine. So alcohol is absolutely fine in moderation, and we should always have 2 alcohol-free days a week. The concept of harahachibu, which is very much from the Okinawan, so Japanese, of eat till you're 80% full, which means eat reasonably slowly, because if you eat fast, you've filled up before your brain knows you've filled up. If you eat slowly, you will be satisfied without being totally stuffed, if you know what I mean. So it is important. And as I said, no overeating or over drinking. Maintaining independence is really, really important. Keep doing the tasks each day that you've been doing all your life, the driving, the shopping, going to meetings and things. Too often we disable older people by saying, oh, let's get a cleaner in, let's get someone in to do this for you, get your shopping home delivered, do this, do that. Look, through COVID, home delivered shopping was an absolute godsend. But you need to maintain your independence. And I say to people, only accept assistance when it's necessary and for as short a period of time as possible. Because once you give up one of those tasks, it's very hard to get it back. And they're the sorts of things that can keep you more active. Avoiding disease, I mean, that's pretty obvious, but I do need to say it, because old age is not declining health. They are not synonymous by any means. To successfully age, you try and avoid disease, and you can do that. Immunisations are incredibly important. I hope you'll all go and get your flu vax very soon, and also COVID, although goodness knows when that's going to happen. I've certainly had my first COVID, my AstraZeneca vaccination, and for those of us over 60, Do it without any worries. And look, quite frankly, even the under 60s, a lot of my colleagues who are well under 60 have all had the AstraZeneca, because that's what's been offered to us in our vaccination hub at Hornsby. But please get your vaccination when you can, because it's the most important way to keep well. But don't forget also, there's the pneumonia vaccination, there's shingles vaccination. There's important to have those, and you might feel a bit unwell afterwards. Hopefully you do a bit, because that means it's working, but it's the best way to prevent disease, and treat it once it's present. The number of people that say to me, oh, I'm not going to worry about my diabetes, I'm old anyway. Well, no, you don't want to die with gangrene or lose your vision or kidney failure as a result of not controlling your blood sugars. And I think it is important to treat. And don't say disease is due to aging. And I always think of the apocryphal story of the guy that went to the orthopedic surgeon with a sore knee, and he said, well, what do you expect? You're 90. And he looked at the patient looked at the doctor and said, but my other knee's 90 and it's fine. And I think, you've got to think, okay, what's actually going on? But don't always blame aging. Okay, so looking at diseases that are associated with getting older and what we can do about it. Changes in memory and thinking are really important. There are normal age-related changes, and I do want to highlight those. We do get slower at a lot of things as we get older. There's a decline in our working memory. It just works more slowly, but we maintain our vocabulary, our general knowledge, and our occupational expertise. And I think that is so important. I have watched an 85-year-old man work on an engine and fix the engine that his 30-year-old grandson could not get running, simply because he'd done it before and he knew how to do it. We keep all that. We keep our recipes. We keep, and I'm thinking we, for the women in particular, we learn those cooking skills are important. You keep those, whether it's sewing, whether it's work things. People often say to me, how did you know that person had something unusual? And I think in one case it was a meningococcal disease. And I said, because I've seen it before. And you don't have to go through a million steps and tests, because you've got that memory of it. And that's very much the situation as we get older. We can't multitask like we used to. I can remember, doing the cooking, supervising the homework, TV was on, and maybe even talking on the phone or something. You could do that, not anymore. That's fine. You do what you can well, and we don't go through mazes as fast as we might have once. And most importantly, and I've got a picture of John and Ika from the second series of Old People's Home for 4-year-olds down here, because John has difficulty remembering names. And that isn't a normal age-related change. And you teach yourself tricks about how to try and remember names. That's normal aging. Dementia is very different. You lose short-term memory, but you lose vocabulary. You lose the ability to do calculations, shortened attention span, your visual spatial stuff. You won't see things where they are, and that can be a real problem with people with dementia. You don't have the same reasoning ability. You get changes in personality. They all have to have an impact on function for it to be defined as dementia. And I mention that because I remember seeing a lady many years ago who was sacked by her bridge partner because her memory was poor. And she was very worried she was developing dementia. She actually died about 18 years after that, because I went to her funeral. She never developed dementia. She just had short-term memory problems, and she never went back to bridge. But she functioned normally, other than not being able to play bridge, for the rest of her life. She did not have dementia. So it's important that if you get those changes, they actually impact what you're doing day to day. We know dementia is common as we get older. And remember, I said women live to 85. So at 85, 1 in 3 of us will have dementia. So if you don't have it, you're probably going to be living with someone that does. Alzheimer's disease is the commonest cause in Australia. We don't know what causes it, and we don't have a cure yet, even though it's 115 years since it was first described by Alois Alzheimer. So it's a bit of a bugger. We've got a better idea with some of the other dementias, but unfortunately Alzheimer's is what we see. Dementia is now the commonest cause of death for women in Australia. Second highest for men, and I bet it'll be up there as the highest for men soon. So it's out there. You know, it's kind of, it is common. It's also, we're seeing younger people. They're probably 25,000 younger people with dementia. And I mention that because it is there. And look, the one good thing about getting dementia when you're younger now is NDIS, because it really is a game changer in terms of providing support for younger people with dementia. You know, when you've got teenagers or even younger children and you diagnose with dementia, it's a disaster. NDIS has really changed that for them, which is good. And you can keep your NDIS services after you turn 65. You just can't get them if your diagnosis is made after the age of 65. We know what we can do to prevent dementia, and we should be doing it. I put this slide up. The Lancet, you know, probably one of the world's best medical journals, actually had a commission on dementia, and the report, and you can download it if you just Google Lancet Commission on Dementia. It was July 2017. It is a really comprehensive discussion on dementia prevention, management and care. But they do talk a lot about prevention. And if you look at that slide, 1 in 3 cases of dementia could be prevented if we address those factors. And I've said it already. So mental activity. So we know that if you stay keeping your brain active, it's good. Physical activity and social contact. They're all the same as aging successfully. They prevent or slow dementia. The things we have to watch, and it's interesting, hearing loss. So hopefully I've scared a few of my older patients into getting hearing aids, because if you address hearing loss, you seem to reduce the risk. High blood pressure, obesity, smoking, depression, diabetes. We've known about those for a while, and they just need to be treated and managed well to reduce the risk of dementia. So the other thing I want to talk about is frailty, and I hope this will work. It's a video, and I'll just be quiet for a minute, and hopefully now, that was a video that was shown on national TV in France a couple of years ago, because they really wanted to raise awareness about frailty. And I just wish we could do something similar to that here in Australia and actually get people thinking about frailty. So what is it? It's a state of weakness, exhaustion, slowness. But what's really important is you are much more vulnerable to illness, to falls, functional decline and death if you are frail. And we know that people who are frail are 2 to 3 times as likely to need healthcare of one sort or another. They end up in hospital, they stay longer in hospital, they have worse outcomes compared to non-frail older people, and they die much sooner. They end up in residential care. It's really a not nice thing. There is quite a good definition of frailty, and it's certainly the one we use where I work at Hornsby and in my practice. You're frail if you have 3 or more of unexplained weight loss, so you're not trying to lose weight, but you are losing it. Self-reported exhaustion, so you're tired all of the time or most of the time. Slow walking speed, and you will see them measuring that on people's home for 4-year-olds. Weak grip strength, and you'll see that again we measure it with a dynamometer. And low physical activity. You don't walk very far. You might only walk to the front door or, you know, out to the letterbox or something. If you have 3 or more of those, you are probably frail. And it's important because we used to think it was just the normal transition from ill health, well, from good health to ill health to death. It is associated with aging, but it is not inevitable. And I think that's the really important message. It is related to something called sarcopenia, which is age-related muscle mass. And this is the bad news today. We lose 1% of our muscle mass each year from age 30. So we're all sitting here with less muscle than we had a few years ago. Even when you're a really good athlete, that happens. And if you look at the two slides at the bottom that kind of look like a piece of rump steak and then a piece of Wagyu beef, one is a cross-section of your thigh at 25, and the other one is a cross-section at age 63 of very similar, two men with very similar characteristics otherwise. And this is what happens as we get older. And that kind of predisposes us to frailty because we replace our muscle with fat, and we do it particularly in our buttocks, and thighs, which is why those sit to stand exercises are so important, because they help not reverse it totally, but they certainly improve what's happening. And again, it's the resistance training, it's the weights, it's pushing against something that's important. But we know that adequate protein, nutrition, and also managing polypharmacy. I don't know how many people are taking one of the statins, a atorvastatin for cholesterol. Probably not much use after about 80, unless you really are someone with major cholesterol problems, and they wreck your muscles quite often. So we know it's important to look at the medication people are taking and try not to make things worse. I just want to show you two videos here. We did a study at Hornsby on reversing frailty. So 241 frail older people, and they either got treatment with physio and nutrition and looking at their medication, or no treatment. And we just followed them up as well, but they got what they would normally get for their age. So this is a lady at the start. She had 4 out of 5 of those frailty characteristics. And here she is trying to get out of her chair. It's quite important to be able to get on and off your couch. She manages it with a lot of effort and pushing and using her arms. And she was frail, slow walking speed, she was tired, low grip strength, and she didn't expend much energy. 6 months later, this is the same lady. And you can see, no tricks here, she was so much better after doing her exercises. And it was exercises at home. She didn't go to the gym, but we gave our participants things like sit to stand, heel raises, doing things you could do in your kitchen. It really makes a difference. I think this was published last year, at the beginning of last year, in the British Medical Journal, another very good medical journal, but it got lost in COVID, unfortunately, because it was in February last year. But it was an editorial in the BMJ, which is pretty influential. And it said very clearly, for exercise in people over 85, it is never too late and you are never too old to contract your muscles. And I think that's a really important message. It's never too late to start, and I show you a few more pictures here. The gentleman on the top left had just broken the world record for the over 85 marathon, and I've never been able to do a marathon in 3 hours and 56 minutes, but he did it, and he was over 85. The bottom left and top right, Ruth Frith, who's another of my pin-up girls. She still holds, although she's dead now, the world records for the over 100-year-old shot put, hammer throw, discus and javelin. Pretty amazing lady. And she took up exercise at 75. So we have no excuse. If you want to find out more about healthy aging and frailty, this is, while it's particularly obviously for Northern Sydney, because it is our Sydney North Primary Health Network, so the network of GPs and other primary health providers in Northern Sydney, you can go to that, and you will be getting this presentation as a PDF, so you can find the links. But it gives you information, or it gives us information about frailty. I do want to mention this. Sydney North, the Primary Health Network that we work with our local health district, would like the views of older people. And they've got 2 surveys out. Now, again, don't try and write them down now. We'll send them to you. But there's 2, one for if you're 70 or older, or if you are a carer for someone over 70. And we're basically trying to find out what aspects of care are important for older people. And if you don't know, you can't do anything about it. So please have a look at those questionnaires. And finally, I have a question for you. Why is it important for the younger generation that we age successfully? Just think about it for a minute. Why is it important? And the answer is grandparents. In Australia annually, at least 1 million children receive some care from grandparents. And we know that grandparenting is good. Not every day. There's a lovely study from Melbourne, the Australian Women's Healthy Ageing Project, which showed that older women who were minding grandchildren had better cognitive function than their counterparts who didn't. And it wasn't that they couldn't because they had dementia. They actually followed them over quite a long period of time. Mind you, it was 2 days a week. Once you started looking after them 3 days a week or more, it wasn't so good. And I must admit, I don't volunteer for more than a day at a time with my grandchildren because it's just exhausting. But I think Old People's Home for 4-year-olds has really illustrated a lot of the benefits of interaction between young and old, and we need to encourage that. And I talk about grandparenting to the community, which is something that you're seeing in series 2 of Old People's Home for 4-year-olds, of using old people to pass on skills to young people. And this is the series 1 of Old People's Home for 4-year-olds to show it actually did do good. If you saw the series, you would see, you can eyeball it, everybody did a lot better. But we actually measured it scientifically as well. 7-week intervention. These people had an average age of 87 years. We measured walking speed, as we are in the second series, walking speed, hand grip strength, etc. Basically, everybody improved in just about everything, which is absolutely amazing for a study. But we saw it happen in real life. The other important thing is that effect has been sustained. And when we saw people before Christmas last year, which is actually 2 years from the time it was originally filmed, although 3 of the participants had died, 3 of the older adults, a lot of the others were still involved. And I think that's really important. So finally, I'm going to leave the last word to Madame Ginny-Calment. So sorry, Ellen, I hope I haven't gone too long. When Madame Ginny-Calment, I think she was about 119, she was asked by an interviewer, "You've lived a long time, what do you expect the future to be like?" And she said, "Very short." And I think that's important, but boy, did she live a good life. And I think she's a very good example for us. So with that, I will open it up for questions. I may stop sharing my screen, I think, Ellen, if that's okay. And
yes,
then
that's
I can
absolutely
see you
fine.
more clearly, and we can go through questions. I would, though, before we go into some, I didn't answer the ones I promised I would during the talk. I think there were a few about vitamins. And what sort of supplements should we be taking as we get older? Are there ones that are good or aren't good? I do want to mention vitamin D. I think that's important. I take vitamin D from the beginning of April to the end of September, simply because I don't think I get out into the sun enough. I'm pretty sure I get plenty in the rest of the year. But vitamin D is important, not just for muscles or bones. We think it's probably important in the brain as well, because there are vitamin D receptors. Vitamin D is actually not a vitamin. It's actually a hormone, cholecalciferol. So vitamin D is important, and calcium to go with it if you're not getting a lot of calcium. I say to people, look, add skim milk powder to your coffee. It just makes it very milky, but you're getting your calcium. It's better to get your calcium in food than in supplements, but if you're not getting enough, supplements are fine. Magnesium is also quite important if you get cramps, and that was a question. Magnesium at night, and you can get it, Magmin is the one that's often suggested. It does help for cramps. Multivitamins, I'm a bit iffy on those. Look, I certainly have them and will take them, particularly if I'm not eating well, if things are busy. If you're not feeling like you're getting a really good diet, if you're living on your own, quite often it's handy to take a multivitamin to make sure you're getting all the bits and pieces. I think that's quite important. Vitamin C, well, when I was a child, my mother gave us Halavol, which was basically vitamins A and D and vitamin C, because she believed you wouldn't get colds. Well, I don't know whether it was placebo or whether it worked, but we were in an incredibly healthy family. And I think it does, we know vitamin C helps with healing. If you've got an ulcer or perhaps you've had a cold, there probably is some benefit. But I suspect, like a lot of things, it works for some people and not for others. So there's not a huge amount of strong evidence like there is, say, for vitamin D. Vitamin D is really important. It's important in frailty as well, if you have low levels of vitamin D. And I say to my older patients, get your doctor to do one vitamin D level when you have your next lot of blood tests. It is amazing how many people have low vitamin D, and it's so easy to address. Okay, so those are the ones I was going to talk about. And the other thing was to say, look at your website, the Willoughby Council website, if there's services that people are interested in.
Okay, beautiful. We've got a couple of online questions that came through chat. So our first one here is, how do people with physical limitations, like not being able to walk more than, say, 500 meters, unable to bend knees, are supposed to exercise? So what would be a starting point for that?
Exercise physiologists have some really, really good alternatives for people who can't walk. Because let's face it, a lot of people do have osteoarthritic knees or hips. Exercising in water is really good, but obviously that kind of went out in COVID. You can get, if you like, a sort of stationary bike where you're not having to bend your knees too much. But there are a number of exercises, things like a modified rowing machine. Admittedly, that costs a little bit, but exercise physiologists have some really good ways of teaching people to get a little bit puffed when you can't walk. Cycling or swimming are the obvious easy ones, but there are others. And a session with an exercise physiologist could be really, or a physiotherapist, could be really worthwhile.
Wonderful. Okay. If my mother and grandmother had dementia, does that mean my chances are higher of developing it?
It does depend on the sort of dementia. I'm very much in that category. My grandmother had dementia. My mum has dementia, although she's now she's be 94 soon. So if a first degree relative, so mother, father, sister, brother, child, has dementia, your lifetime risk, and this is approximate, goes from about 36%. So for all of us listening today, our lifetime risk is about 36%. That's about 1 in 3, assuming we're going to live to that 85. If you have that first degree relative, it goes from 36 to 39% approximately. If it's a genetic mutation, not good, you're probably bound to get it, but that's people usually in their 30s, 40s, maybe 50s. There's a few things that can make you more likely to do it. But if you've got high blood pressure because your mother had it and your grandmother had it, if you treat that blood pressure, you're going to reduce the risk. They probably didn't have it treated in the same way, certainly not your grandmother. So I think it's really important to look at the risk factors, go back to that slide from the Lancet and say, okay, what can I do about this? And clearly, if you are very, very overweight, losing a bit of that weight's good. And if you do it with a good diet and your exercise, you're knocking off 3 birds with 1 stone. So it's quite a good way of trying to deal with it.
Fantastic. What can we do if we don't have any friends and we're childless and said friendship is so important? So I suppose that's a question about connecting into local community, etc.
Yeah, it's very much joining a local activity group. Look, that's where I think U3A can help, the University of the Third Age, but there are a number of activity groups. And Ellen, I'm sure you've got links to some on your website, and certainly you can just Google social groups for older people and have a look. It is hard. Look, as we showed on Old People's Home for 4-year-olds, 1.6 million older people in Australia live alone.
Yeah, and I think remembering as well that your local council is there, that they run a lot of activities, they have a lot of education programs, and they also have the knowledge to be able to link you into community groups as well. So not to forget about contact your local councils. I acknowledge that it is the best for people to keep doing things they have always done. But what about climbing ladders? Is there an age or stage where people should stop, or is there a test, if you like? I suppose that's probably around understanding your own limitations.
Yeah, we say no one over 20 should climb a ladder. But look, it's very much your own limitations and the safety of the ladder, and have you got someone else with you. But look, we see them come in to hospital, and my son works in the emergency department, and while he'll joke about it, it's often tragic. If you fall off a ladder and you hit your head, it's going to be like Carla Zampatti. Carla fell over and hit her head hard and died. And we do see this quite often. It's not just a simple trip. If you just slip and strain your ankle, you've been lucky, but you should not go back up that ladder. There are plenty of people who will do it for you for a small price, or just get your grandchildren. But ladders are, they're a bit dangerous.
Yeah. Okay, there's a good question here that says, as we get older, it seems we become more intolerant to things such as lactose, maltose, sucrose, etc. Is that a scientifically proven, or a fact as we get older? Or could you answer a little bit around that?
Yeah, it is really interesting. There is some work being done on this. Irritable bowel syndrome gets commoner as you get older. And I think we've cured a lot of it by saying to people, okay, don't drink as much milk. So there's your lactose intolerance coming in, or watch what you eat in terms of what's lactose. And the other one is gluten. Don't eat as much bread. And I think, Ellen, there's fairly good evidence that our bowels do age along with everything else.
Yep.
And while we can see it visually with our grey hair and our wrinkles, and the fact that all our flesh tends to go south, the effect of gravity, I think it's important to know you do get changes in the bowel, and we often have to adjust a bit. There's a lot of very interesting work being done on gut biome. So or your gut microbiome, so the bugs that live in your gut, and you've got billions of bugs living in your gut. They're good ones. Yep. And how they're affected by things. So I think that's quite important to think about that. But it's experiment.
Yeah, and I suppose that is the realization that, like you said, our bowels are aging too, and what we could tolerate as younger people, we may not be able to tolerate, and sometimes it's just a process of elimination, but at the same time, not to the point of where you're getting rid of all the calcium out of your diet by stopping. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay. I think we have one more question here. Okay, if you are alone and have no friends, how will this affect your mental condition? I think we've covered this a little bit, but if you want to just talk a tiny bit more about the importance of communication and being connected.
Yeah, look, it's very interesting. There are a lot of people who live alone but aren't lonely because, as one lady said to me, I have my cat, I have the birds who come visit when the cat's not around, I suppose. I have talkback radio. I have a lot of things. I have friends that or I have people that will ring. I think that's important. You've got to develop those networks. But in terms of the effect on you, loneliness leads to depressive symptoms and you can become depressed. But if you're on your own, there's no one there to notice that your ankles might be swelling, or you might be more breathless, or you're a bit unwell, or you've got a temperature. So people often can get quite unwell when there's no one keeping an eye on them. And so there's risks. If you fall over, no one finds you for a while. And so developing those networks is really important. And I think we kind of showed that on the ABC series. We purposely did that because this is such an issue. And I think more and more people, because families move away and they're out of contact, you do need to develop those relationships, develop those networks.
Yeah. And I think, yes, as well, like you were saying, never too late to start the same way, even developing to try and connect into someone in your community, or, volunteer, or call your council, or speak to the person next door. Even sometimes they may even have networks that you're not aware of. Okay, we're going to have one more question here because it's come up quite a few times. Zinc. Food with zinc makes you feel better, feel good. Is that scientifically proven, or?
Zinc is good in healing again. So it's something that you will use if someone, particularly if someone has an ulcer, as in a leg ulcer, or, you know, they need some, if you like, a bit of help with their healing. That's where zinc is good. We only need very, very tiny amounts of it.
Okay.
But if you're not getting it, and I can't for the life of me remember what foods it's in, then that's obviously where a multivitamin can be useful. Other people, you know, will take larger amounts and say it does make them feel better. If it makes them feel better and it's not hurting them, I am not going to say don't take it, because I think we have no idea often the effect of something, even the placebo effect, you know, the effect that taking something, even if it's not doing anything, if you think it is, that power of positive thinking is so important. And I certainly don't downplay that. I think it is important.
That's fantastic. And well, that's all we have time for today. Just to let everybody online know, Professor Kurrle will be actually giving us her overhead presentation. So we will actually send that out to people who've registered for today. Again, today's webinar has been recorded and will be available on the Willoughby City Council Older Adults page. And I would just like to thank Professor Kurrle for giving us her time again today. It's been fantastic, wealth of knowledge and information. I think I'll be doing a little bit of extra exercise in the upcoming months. And brilliant to have you here. Thank you so much. I hope everybody has enjoyed today's session. Thank you so much, Professor Kurrle.
Thanks, Ellen, and bye, everybody.